The rain had not asked permission before it began, and neither had the cruelty that followed her out of the house. It came in sharp words, slammed doors, and the sound of her suitcase hitting the pavement like a verdict already decided. She stood there, barefoot on the wet steps, clutching the edge of her shawl as if it could stitch her life back together. "You're useless," her husband had said, his voice steady, rehearsed. "A woman who can't give a child has no place here." The door had closed before she could answer. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned that some silences were forced upon you. Her name was Era. She was 32 years old, married for 7 years, and just divorced without paperwork. In that quiet street, with rain soaking through her clothes and pride dissolving in puddles, she realized how quickly a woman could become homeless in a world that measured her worth by a womb. She walked until the pain in her feet matched the ache in her chest. Past shuttered shops, past laughing cafes, past families rushing indoors. No one looked twice. Shame, she had learned, made you invisible. She found shelter under the awning of a closed bookstore, curling into herself as the rain softened into a steady whisper. Memories came uninvited. The doctor's room that smelled of antiseptic and pity, her husband's stiff nod, the slow withdrawal of his affection. Infertile. The word had hollowed her out long before it expelled her from her home. Across the street, a black car idled. Its windows were tinted, its presence out of place in that quiet, rain-washed road. Inside, a man watched the woman on the sidewalk with a frown he hadn't worn during board meetings or investor calls. Evan Cross had built companies from nothing. He was used to problems that could be solved with money, strategy, or silence. This one unsettled him. His son stirred in the back seat, pressing his face against the glass. "Dad," the boy said softly, "why is that lady crying?" Evan followed his gaze. The woman under the awning hadn't realized tears were falling. They mixed with rain, making it impossible to tell where sorrow ended and weather began. "She's just having a hard day," Evan replied. The boy's voice was thoughtful. "You always say hard days shouldn't be faced alone." Evan closed his eyes for a moment. Children had a way of quoting truths you weren't ready to live by. He opened the door and stepped into the rain. Era didn't notice him until his shadow crossed the puddle at her feet. She looked up sharply, fear flickering before exhaustion took over. The man standing before her wore a dark coat, his hair damp from rain, his expression careful, not curious, not judgmental. Just present. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head quickly. "No. I'm fine." It was the lie of someone who no longer believed help was allowed. Evan gestured toward the closed shop. "This place isn't going to open tonight. You'll catch a fever sitting here." She hesitated. Pride wrestled with survival. "I'll move along." "Where to?" The question struck deeper than he intended. Her lips parted, then closed. She looked away. "I don't know." Evan exhaled slowly. He had not planned this moment. But some moments plan you. "My car's right there," he said gently. "My son and I are heading home. You don't have to tell me anything. Just, come with me. At least until the rain stops." Her first instinct was to refuse. Years of learning obedience had not taught her how to accept kindness. But the rain fell harder, and the thought of another step felt unbearable. She looked past him and saw the boy in the back seat, his small hand lifted in a shy wave, hope shining without suspicion. Something in her broke open. "Just until the rain stops," she whispered. Evan nodded, as if sealing a contract no lawyer would dare write. Inside the car, warmth wrapped around her like something she had forgotten she deserved. The boy smiled at her, gap-toothed and gentle. "I'm Leo," he said. "You can sit by the window." Era managed a smile. "Thank you, Leo." The car pulled away, the house she had been thrown from disappearing into the blur of rain and memory. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know who this man truly was. All she knew was that for the first time since the word infertile had defined her existence, someone had not asked what she lacked. As the city lights began to glow against the dark sky, Evan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his voice calm but deliberate. "You can stay with us tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure everything else out." Era's hands trembled in her lap. Her heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with the terrifying possibility that her life had not ended on those wet steps, that it might, somehow, be beginning again. The car moved smoothly through the rain-slicked streets, the rhythm of the wipers steady and almost hypnotic. Era pressed her palms together, trying to absorb the warmth seeping back into her fingers. She stared out the window, watching the city slide past in blurred reflections, afraid that if she spoke, the fragile reality of this moment might shatter. Evan's house stood on a quiet hill, understated but solid, lights glowing softly behind wide windows. It didn't feel like a fortress of wealth, it felt lived in. When he opened the door, the smell of food and clean linen met her, and for a moment Era simply stood there, unsure whether she was allowed to step into a life that wasn't hers. "You can leave your shoes there," Evan said gently, noticing her hesitation. Leo, grab the towels. The boy hurried off with enthusiasm, returning with 2 oversized towels that swallowed Era's thin frame. She wrapped one around her shoulders, the simple gesture undoing her composure. Tears threatened again, and she lowered her head, ashamed. "Thank you," she whispered. Dinner was simple, soup, warm bread, and fruit, but to Era it felt ceremonial. Leo talked non-stop about school, his favorite dinosaur, and the science project he'd forgotten to mention earlier. Evan listened, occasionally glancing at Era, making sure she was eating, making sure she was still there. "You don't have to talk," he said quietly when Leo ran off to change. "Not tonight." She nodded, grateful beyond words. Later, Evan showed her a small guest room. Clean sheets. A lamp already switched on. Nothing extravagant, yet everything felt unreal. "You can rest," he said. "I'll be up early. We can talk when you're ready." When the door closed, Era sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. These hands had cooked, cleaned, prayed, and endured. They had held test results and disappointment. Tonight, they held nothing, and yet she felt fuller than she had in years. Sleep came slowly. Memories rose and fell like waves. Her husband's face when the doctor spoke. The cold distance that followed. His mother's pointed remarks. The silence at family gatherings. The final argument, sharp and humiliating, ending with her clothes thrown into a bag she hadn't packed herself. She woke before dawn, disoriented, then remembered where she was. For a moment, panic flared. She slipped quietly out of the room, heart racing, ready to leave before she became a burden. In the kitchen, Evan sat at the table, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. He looked tired but alert, as if he hadn't truly slept either. "You don't have to run," he said softly. Era froze. "I wasn't." "It's okay," he interrupted, not unkindly. "People who've been pushed out learn to move quickly." She sat opposite him, fingers twisting together. "I won't stay long. I just needed one night." "You needed safety," Evan replied. "There's a difference." The morning light crept in, illuminating the faint lines on his face, the kind that came from responsibility rather than age. "I'm a single father," he said, as if explaining something important. "Leo's mother passed away when he was 3. Since then, it's just been us." "I'm sorry," Era said instinctively. He nodded once. "I don't need sympathy. I need honesty. And right now, the honest thing is, you don't have a place to go." Her throat tightened. "I'll find one." "You will," he agreed. "But not today. Stay. Help around the house if it makes you feel better. Or don't. Just breathe." Leo burst into the kitchen, hair sticking up in every direction. "Is Era staying?" he asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Evan paused, then smiled. "For a little while." Leo grinned. "Good. I like her." That simple declaration felt heavier than any insult Era had endured. She looked away quickly. Days turned into a rhythm. Era cooked, cleaned, and slowly, cautiously, laughed. She helped Leo with homework, listened to his stories, learned the exact way he liked his sandwiches cut. Evan worked from home more often, something his board had not anticipated. He noticed how the house softened when Era moved through it, how Leo slept better, how dinners grew warmer. One afternoon, as Era folded laundry, Evan stood in the doorway. "You don't have to earn your place here," he said. She didn't look up. "I don't know how to exist without being useful." He understood that too well. The first time Leo called her Auntie Era, she nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Evan watched her reaction carefully, ready to correct the boy, but Era smiled instead. Small, fragile, real. At night, when the house grew quiet, Evan and Era sat on opposite ends of the couch, talking about nothing and everything. Books. Fears. The weight of expectations. Neither crossed a line, yet something gentle and unspoken began to take shape between them. Still, Era's past waited patiently. One evening, her phone buzzed for the first time in weeks. Her husband's name lit up the screen. Her heart lurched. Evan noticed her pale face. "You don't have to answer," he said. She swallowed hard. "I need to." She stepped outside, the cool air biting at her skin. The voice on the other end was familiar and sharp. Accusations. Regret. Control disguised as concern. "You embarrassed me," he said. "People are talking." Era closed her eyes. For years, she had folded herself smaller with every word like this. Tonight, something was different. "I didn't embarrass you," she said quietly. "You discarded me." The silence that followed felt powerful. When she came back inside, Evan looked at her not with curiosity, but with respect. Whatever fragile piece they had built was about to be tested. Because the world that had rejected Era was beginning to notice where she had landed, and it would not let her go without a fight. The house seemed to breathe differently after that call, as if it, too, understood that something had shifted. Era moved more slowly that night, her thoughts loud, her heart restless. Evan didn't press her with questions. He simply stayed nearby, an unspoken reassurance that she was not alone in whatever came next. The next morning, reality arrived with the mail. An envelope lay on the kitchen counter, thick and official, her name written in a handwriting she knew too well. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. Evan noticed immediately. "You don't have to open it now," he said. She shook her head. "If I don't, it will open me instead." Inside were documents, legal language wrapped around familiar cruelty. Her husband wanted her to sign a statement relinquishing any claim to their shared home, their savings, their past. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just erasure. Leo watched her from the doorway, sensing the tension. "Did someone make you sad again?" he asked. Era forced a smile. "Not sad," she said softly. "Just, brave things are hard." That afternoon, Evan made a call he had avoided for years, to his legal counsel, not as a CEO, but as a man who refused to watch injustice repeat itself quietly. "I'm not fighting for myself," he said firmly. "I'm standing with someone who deserves dignity." Era overheard part of the conversation and felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest, not dependence, but partnership. For the first time, someone was not rescuing her. They were standing beside her. Word spread faster than she expected. Her mother-in-law showed up at the gate one evening, her face pinched with indignation. "You've ruined our family name," she spat when Era stepped outside. "Living off a stranger like this." Evan appeared beside Era, calm but immovable. "She's not living off anyone," he said. "She's staying where she's respected." The woman scoffed. "And what do you know of marriage?" "Of duty." Evan's voice didn't rise. "Enough to know that love doesn't discard." Era stood straighter than she had in years. The confrontation ended not with shouting, but with boundaries drawn clearly and finally. Inside the house, her hands shook. Evan handed her a glass of water. "You did well," he said. She met his eyes. "I didn't know I could." "You always could," he replied. "You just weren't allowed to." As weeks passed, Era began to reclaim parts of herself she thought were gone forever. She started volunteering at a local community center, helping women who carried stories disturbingly similar to hers. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, her words were gentle but unafraid. One evening, a woman asked her, "How did you survive being told you were incomplete?" Era thought of the rain, the steps, the car door opening. She thought of Leo's laughter, Evan's quiet presence. "I stopped letting other people define wholeness," she said. At home, Leo began bringing her drawings, stick figures holding hands, a house with 3 smiling faces. Evan noticed but didn't comment. He knew better than to rush something fragile. Still, the tension grew, not between them, but within the space they shared. Late nights became longer conversations. Accidental touches lingered a moment too long. They both felt it and both pretended not to. One night, the power went out during a storm. Candles flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. Leo slept through it, curled tightly with his blanket. In the living room, Era and Evan sat across from each other, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "You don't owe me anything," Evan said suddenly. Era looked up. "Neither do you." He nodded. "That's what scares me." She exhaled slowly. "I've spent my life being chosen for the wrong reasons. I don't know how to be chosen just because I am." Evan's voice was low. I don't know how to choose without fear. The storm raged outside, thunder echoing like unresolved questions. Era stood and moved toward the window, arms wrapped around herself. I was told my value ended where motherhood didn't begin, she said quietly. Some days, that voice still finds me. Evan joined her, careful not to touch her unless invited. Then let me be the voice that reminds you of everything else. She turned to him then, eyes shining, not broken. And what if I can't give you what the world expects? He met her gaze, unwavering. Then maybe it's time the world learned new expectations. A knock sounded at the door, sharp and insistent, cutting through the moment like a blade. Evan frowned and moved toward it. When he opened it, a man stood there, well-dressed, familiar, eyes sharp with entitlement. Era's breath caught. Her husband had come in person. I want my wife back, he said flatly, stepping forward as if the space already belonged to him. Evan stepped aside just enough for Era to see that this time, she was not standing alone. And Era, feeling the weight of her past and the fragile strength of her present, took a step forward, toward the confrontation she had been running from, and the life she was finally ready to claim. The room seemed to contract around them, as if the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Era felt the old fear rise instinctively, sharp and familiar, but it stopped halfway this time. It paused, confused, as if it no longer knew where it belonged. I'm not your wife, she said, her voice steady enough to surprise even herself. Her husband scoffed, stepping fully inside without invitation. You're emotional. Come home. We can fix this quietly. Evan closed the door behind him with deliberate calm. You're trespassing, he said. Say what you came to say and leave. The man's eyes flicked to Evan, measuring him, misjudging him. This doesn't concern you. It does, Evan replied evenly, because she's here by choice. Era felt something loosen in her chest. She moved closer, not behind Evan, but beside him. The positioning mattered. You threw me out, she said, meeting her husband's gaze without flinching. You didn't ask me to leave. You decided I was no longer worthy. That's not what happened, he snapped. You failed me. A family needs children. Era inhaled slowly. A family needs kindness. You never understood that. For a moment, he looked genuinely unsettled. He had expected tears. Begging. Silence. Not this calm clarity that stripped his authority bare. You think you can survive without me? He asked, lowering his voice. People will talk. They already are. Evan spoke before Era could respond. Let them. The man turned sharply. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Playing savior. Evan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. No. I'm standing where you refused to. Leo's bedroom door creaked open. Era's heart skipped. She turned just as the boy stepped into the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. What's happening? Leo asked softly. Era moved instinctively toward him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Go back to bed, she said. Everything's okay. The presence of the child changed the air. Her husband glanced at Leo, something unreadable crossing his face. So this is it, he muttered. You've replaced me. Era felt anger rise then, not hot, but resolute. I didn't replace you, she said. You left. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Finally, her husband straightened his coat. You'll regret this, he said coldly. You always come back. Era met his gaze one last time. Not this time. He left without another word. The door closed, not with a slam, but with finality. Era's legs trembled once the adrenaline faded. Evan turned to her, concern etched across his face. Are you all right? She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed softly through tears. I don't know what I am, she said. But I know what I'm not anymore. Leo hugged her waist suddenly, tight and unfiltered. I was scared, he said into her sweater. She knelt and held him back, her eyes closing. Me too, she whispered. But we're okay. That night, sleep came in fragments. Era lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the house, aware that something irreversible had occurred. Not just a confrontation, but a crossing. She had stepped out of one life and refused to be pulled back. The next morning, Evan made breakfast while Leo chatted about school. Era watched them, noticing how natural it felt now, how dangerous that comfort could be. I don't want to complicate your life, she said quietly when Leo left the room. Evan looked at her seriously. You didn't complicate it, he said. You clarified it. She smiled faintly. That sounds like something a CEO would say. He chuckled. Old habit. A few days later, the legal proceedings began. Papers arrived. Meetings were scheduled. Era faced them with a steadiness she didn't know she possessed. Evan never spoke over her, never took control. He stood beside her, a presence rather than a shield. At the community center, the women noticed the change in her. One of them said, "You walk differently now." Era thought about that later. About posture. About weight shifting from shoulders to spine. About learning to stand. One evening, Leo brought home a permission slip for a school event labeled Family Day. He hovered uncertainly. I don't know who to put, he said. Era froze. Evan noticed immediately. He knelt beside Leo. You can put me, he said gently. And if you want, you can put Era too. Leo's face lit up. Really? Evan looked at Era, giving her space. She nodded slowly, heart pounding. Yes, she said. If you want me there. I do, Leo said simply, already scribbling her name. That night, Era stood alone in the guest room that no longer felt temporary. She stared at her reflection, touching her own face as if meeting it for the first time. She wasn't a discarded wife. She wasn't an incomplete woman. She wasn't a mistake. Down the hall, Evan paused outside her door, hand hovering, then lowering again. Some things deserved patience. The future loomed, uncertain, demanding, unguaranteed. But for the first time, Era didn't feel like she was walking toward it alone or borrowed. She felt like she was finally walking toward herself. The morning of Family Day arrived wrapped in soft sunlight and quiet courage. Era stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, smoothing her dress not because she wanted to look perfect, but because she wanted to look present. The woman staring back at her no longer searched for approval. She searched for honesty, and found it. When they arrived at the school, the courtyard buzzed with laughter, parents calling out names, children tugging hands in every direction. Era hesitated at the gate, old instincts whispering that she didn't belong in places labeled family. Evan noticed and slowed his steps without a word. Leo reached back and grabbed her hand. Come on, he said. You're with us. Those 3 words settled into her bones. They spent the morning moving from booth to booth. Evan listened more than he spoke. Leo introduced Era proudly, without explanations, without apologies. No one questioned it. No one needed to. Sometimes, belonging arrives not because it's argued for, but because it's lived openly. Later, as Leo ran off with friends, Evan and Era sat on a low bench under a jacaranda tree in bloom. Purple petals drifted down, brushing their shoulders like blessings neither of them had asked for. I used to think my life ended when I was sent away, Era said quietly. That everything after would just be survival. And now? Evan asked. And now, she said, it feels like a second life. One I didn't know I was allowed to have. He looked at her carefully. You didn't lose your worth when you lost your marriage, he said. You just lost the place that refused to see it. The legal process ended months later, not dramatically, but decisively. Era walked out of the courtroom lighter, not because she had gained something material, but because she had reclaimed her name without shame attached to it. She didn't look back. Her ex-husband faded into the background of her life the way some storms do, loud when they arrive, irrelevant once they pass. The community center grew busier. Era began leading sessions, not as a speaker on pain, but as a guide through rebuilding. Women sat in circles, sharing stories that had never been allowed air. Era listened, nodded, sometimes smiled. You survived, one woman said to her after a session. How? Era thought of rain, of a car door opening, of a child's voice. I was seen, she replied. That's where it starts. Evan watched these changes quietly, deeply. He never claimed credit. He never rushed her steps. Love, he learned, was not about filling a void, but protecting a becoming. One evening, after Leo had gone to sleep, Evan and Era sat on the porch, the night warm and still. The house felt settled now, no longer borrowed. I don't need you to choose me, Era said softly. I need you to walk with me. Evan nodded. That's all I've ever wanted. He didn't kneel. He didn't offer promises dressed as certainty. He offered truth instead. I can't give you a perfect story, he said. But I can give you a steady one. Era reached for his hand. That's more than enough. Years later, people would ask how it began. Some would say she was saved. Others would say she was lucky. They would all be wrong. She wasn't rescued. She wasn't repaired. She wasn't chosen because she lacked something. She was chosen because she stood back up. On an ordinary afternoon, Era stood in the kitchen, helping Leo with homework while Evan cooked. The house was full of small sounds, pencils scratching, pans clinking, laughter slipping in where it pleased. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. It was real. Era paused, hand resting over her heart, feeling the quiet certainty of something she had never felt before. She was not incomplete. She was not defined by what her body could or could not do. She was not the woman who had been thrown out. She was the woman who stayed, who grew, who built a life where dignity lived first. And sometimes, when the house grew still and the night softened its grip, Era remembered the rain and the moment everything could have ended. She smiled then. Because that was not the end. That was the moment someone said, "Come with me." And she chose to walk forward, into a life that finally, undeniably, belonged to her.